He built a life where every second counted, every deal closed, every emotion buried, until one ordinary afternoon, two little boys with a torn teddy bear stopped him in his tracks. What started as a detour became the moment that unraveled everything he thought he knew about success, love, and the family he never knew he had. Evan Harper didn't believe in stopping. Not for red lights, not for birthdays, not for sleep. His world ran on deadlines, back-to-back meetings, and the silent hum of his phone buzzing against his wrist every 5 minutes. He had built his empire on efficiency and precision, cutting through deals like a surgeon, quick, clean, and emotionally removed. On that particular afternoon, he was running late to a critical investor dinner, the kind that came with cameras and champagne flutes and the illusion of warmth behind tailored suits. His driver took a shortcut through a quieter street, and Evan, glued to his phone, barely looked up until the car slowed. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyes still locked on a contract draft. The driver hesitated. "There are 2 kids, sir. On the curb. One of them's crying." Evan sighed and was about to dismiss it when something told him to look. Just a glance. And that glance stopped him. 2 little boys sat near a cracked sidewalk, no adults in sight. One of them was hugging a torn teddy bear, his face red and wet with tears. The other boy had his arm around him, eyes narrowed not in fear, but fierce protection. Evan stared. He didn't know why, but he opened the car door without thinking. He walked toward them, his shadow stretching across the pavement in the golden light of late afternoon. "Hey," he said softly, crouching down. "Are you okay?" The boy with the dry face spoke. "He tore bear. On accident. Now he's sad." Evan blinked. "Bear?" The sobbing twin turned the toy toward him. It was an old plush bear, seam split down the middle, one button eye missing. Its stuffing peeked through like a wound. Evan felt something twist inside him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pity. Something deeper. Recognition, maybe. "Is bear yours?" he asked. Both boys nodded. Evan glanced back at his car, at the open door and the flashing phone on the seat. Then he looked back at them. "What's your name?" "I'm Lucas," said the dry-eyed one. "He's Liam." Lucas and Liam, Evan repeated slowly. The names sank into him. He paused, then said, "How about we go get bear fixed?" Liam sniffed and looked up. "Really?" Evan nodded. "Really. My car's right there." Lucas hesitated. "We're not supposed to go with strangers." Evan smiled a little. "That's smart. I'm Evan. I'm not scary, just really, really late all the time." Lucas gave him a skeptical once-over, then looked at Liam. Liam nodded. Evan took them to a toy store 2 blocks away. It wasn't planned. It wasn't on his calendar. But he walked through the aisles with 2 5-year-old boys who bickered over whether bear would prefer a new bow tie or a bandage. In the end, they chose a new bear, but Liam wouldn't let go of the old one. Evan paid for both. "Where do you live?" he asked once they were outside. "Right there," Lucas said, pointing toward a row of modest homes across the street. He walked them to the door, carrying the new bear and helping Liam hold on to the old one. Lucas rang the bell. The door opened. And Evan's entire world flipped. Because standing there, in a faded sweater and shock in her eyes, was Olivia Bennett. She looked older, maybe thinner, but still her. Still the woman he'd walked away from 6 years ago because he believed timing mattered more than love. She stared at him. "Evan?" His voice caught before he could answer. She looked down at the boys, then back up at him. He suddenly couldn't breathe. Because in Lucas and Liam's eyes, in the shape of their noses and the angle of their jaws, he saw himself. And for the first time in years, Evan Harper was completely, utterly unprepared. Olivia didn't move. She stood frozen in the doorway, one hand gripping the edge of the frame, the other resting lightly on the side of her hip as if she needed something to ground her. Her eyes flicked between Evan and the two boys at his side, trying to make sense of the scene in front of her. Evan didn't speak. He couldn't. His mouth was dry, his thoughts a blur. He hadn't seen her in years, not since the night she walked out of his penthouse without raising her voice, without slamming the door, just a quiet and final goodbye that he'd told himself not to chase. Now she was standing inches from him, and two small children, children who looked so much like him it made his chest ache, were between them. Lucas was the first to break the silence. "Mommy, this is Evan." He helped fix Bear. His voice was casual, as if the weight of the moment didn't belong to him. Olivia's gaze dropped to the stuffed toy clutched in Liam's arms, now partially restuffed and tied together with ribbon from the toy store. Her eyes welled up briefly before she blinked it away. "Come in," she said, stepping back. The boys ran inside without hesitation, leaving the door open behind them. Evan followed slowly, as though each step inside her house peeled back another layer of the man he used to be. The interior was modest, warm, lived in. There were children's books on the couch, toy trucks in the hallway, and crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of life, something his own home had never been. She offered him a seat, but he remained standing. She didn't push. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, folding her hands as if preparing for a conversation she had rehearsed in her mind many times but hoped would never happen. "You didn't know," she said, not accusing, not soft, just stating it plainly. "No," Evan said, his voice finally finding its way back to him. "I didn't." He looked around again, at the signs of their life, of everything that had grown in his absence. "They're mine, aren't they?" Olivia looked away for a second. "Yes." She didn't elaborate, didn't justify, didn't apologize. "After I left, I found out I was pregnant. I thought about telling you, more than once. But I remembered who you were back then. What your world looked like." He swallowed. "You thought I wouldn't want them. I knew you wouldn't know what to do with them," she said. "You were always chasing something. I didn't want to hand you two children and hope you would choose them over $1 billion deal. You didn't even give me a chance," he said, not bitter, but stunned. "I gave you 6 years of silence," she replied. "You never came looking. Not even once." He had no defense. She was right. He had buried that part of his life, convinced himself she was just a missed opportunity, not a forever one. "What are they like?" he asked quietly. Olivia softened. "Lucas is bold. Always talking, always leading. Liam is gentler. Quiet, but sharp. They're both curious and kind. They're everything." Evan nodded slowly. "They're incredible." There was a pause between them. Not tense. Just full. "I didn't keep them from you out of spite," she said. "I kept them safe. I kept them small, and happy, and whole. I did what I thought was right." He sat down, finally, and looked her in the eye. "Do they know who I am?" She hesitated. "No. They just met a man today who helped with a toy. That's all they need right now." Evan nodded again, more slowly this time. He didn't know what to feel. Guilt and awe and disbelief twisted together. "What do you want from me?" he asked, but there was no edge in the question. Olivia looked tired. "I don't want anything. I don't need your money. I've built this life for them, and it works. But if you're going to be around, you have to mean it. You don't get to come and go." He met her gaze. "I don't want to go. I just don't know how to stay." Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture eased. "Then you can start by coming back tomorrow." He stood up, walked to the door, then turned around. "I'll be here at 9. This time, Olivia didn't nod or smile. She just watched him go, and when the door closed behind him, she exhaled the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for 6 years. Evan arrived the next morning 10 minutes early. He parked 2 houses down and sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. He wasn't sure why he was nervous. He had walked into multi-million-dollar meetings with less hesitation, but standing on Olivia's porch with his hands in his pockets, he felt something unfamiliar creeping under his skin. He rang the doorbell once and heard footsteps inside. When the door opened, it wasn't Olivia who greeted him. It was Lucas, still in his pajamas, holding a cereal bowl in one hand and a plastic dinosaur in the other. "You said 9, Lucas said, squinting at him like a tiny manager checking attendance. Evan smiled. "I know. I was early." Lucas nodded once, satisfied. "Come in. We're eating breakfast." He turned and walked away without waiting for an answer. Evan stepped inside and closed the door behind him, still adjusting to how quickly he'd gone from stranger to tolerated presence. The smell of toast and maple syrup filled the air. Liam sat at the kitchen table with his chin resting on one hand, staring into a bowl of cereal, half awake and blinking slowly. Olivia stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a casual ease that made the whole place feel like a world far removed from Evan's. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard him come in and gave him a slight nod. No smile, no words, just acknowledgement. He offered to help, awkwardly, but she waved him toward the coffee pot instead. "If you want to be useful, pour yourself a cup and survive their morning energy." Evan poured coffee and sat across from Liam, who studied him for a second, then pushed a small toy truck across the table without a word. Evan picked it up and examined it like it was fragile glass. "Cool truck," he said, and Liam gave a tiny smile before going back to his cereal. Over the next 20 minutes, Evan helped clean syrup off the table, put away dishes, and watched Lucas give an overly dramatic retelling of how Bear was almost beyond repair but saved by the power of teamwork. Olivia didn't interfere. She let the boys speak, corrected them gently, and let Evan fumble through figuring out where the forks went. It was the most domestic thing he had done in a decade, and it felt strange, almost dreamlike. And yet, not unpleasant. When the boys went to the living room to build a fort out of blankets and couch cushions, Evan stayed behind to help Olivia finish tidying up. The silence between them wasn't tense, it was cautious. Like neither of them knew what version of themselves they were supposed to be now. "I didn't expect you to come back," Olivia said finally, wiping crumbs into her palm and brushing them into the sink. "I didn't expect to want to," Evan admitted, watching her carefully. "But I did. I still do." She rinsed her hands and turned to him. "You're not here for me, Evan. You're here for them. Don't confuse the two." "I know," he said quietly. "But that doesn't make this any less overwhelming." "It is overwhelming," she agreed. "For me too. But I've had 5 years to learn how to survive it. You haven't." Evan looked down at his hands. "I don't even know how to be around them. They ask me things I don't know how to answer." "Then don't pretend," she said. "They don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be here when you say you will." He nodded, absorbing that like advice he wasn't sure he deserved. "Can I see them again tomorrow?" She hesitated for a second, then said, "Only if you help fold the laundry this time." He almost laughed. "Deal." Later that day, as he left the house, Lucas ran after him barefoot with Bear in one hand and a small, crumpled drawing in the other. "This is for you," he said, handing it over. Evan took the paper carefully and unfolded it. It was a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands, with a brown scribble next to them labeled Bear. Underneath, in blocky kid handwriting, was the word us. Evan didn't know what to say. He knelt down slowly and looked Lucas in the eyes. "Thank you. I'll keep it forever." Lucas grinned. "You better." I used my best crayons. Evan stood, folded the drawing like it was gold, and walked back to his car. He didn't turn on the engine right away. He sat there, staring at the picture in his hands, and felt something shift in his chest, not quickly, not all at once, but undeniably. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to be anywhere else. By the end of the week, Evan had visited 4 times. Each time felt a little less foreign, a little more like something he was allowed to step into. The boys began to expect him, not just as the man who brought toys or helped clean up spilled juice, but as someone who was simply there. They called for him when they wanted something off the top shelf or when the blanket fort collapsed. Lucas started climbing into his lap without asking first. Liam began whispering secrets to him, the kind that only made sense to 5-year-olds but still felt like trust. Evan didn't know how to name the feeling it gave him, maybe it was joy, maybe guilt, maybe something that hadn't fully formed yet, but he welcomed it. Olivia remained cautious. She didn't let her guard down easily, and Evan understood that. He had earned her distance. Still, she was fair. She didn't shut him out. In the quiet moments between the chaos of the kids and the routines of daily life, they sometimes found themselves standing near each other for just a second too long, exchanging looks that felt full of history and hesitation. Evan didn't push. He knew this wasn't about reclaiming the past. This was about building something new, even if it started from broken pieces. One afternoon, Olivia was folding laundry on the living room floor while Evan helped the boys assemble a complicated pirate ship made of plastic and too many instructions. Liam lost a piece and began to cry in frustration, but Evan sat beside him and said, "It's okay. We'll find it. Or we'll make a new one." Liam didn't argue. He just leaned against Evan's side quietly until Lucas returned triumphantly with the missing piece. Olivia watched all of it silently, then returned to her folding, her eyes softer than usual. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Olivia offered him tea. It was the first time she'd done so, and he didn't miss the gesture. They sat in the kitchen, the lights low, voices quiet so as not to wake the kids. Evan sipped the tea and looked around the space, small, a little cluttered, but warm. He realized how empty his own penthouse felt in comparison. "You're good with them," she said eventually, not looking at him. "I'm trying," he answered. "I think I'm still scared I'll mess it up." "You will," she said plainly. "But they'll forgive you if you show up the next day anyway." He nodded, letting the truth of that settle inside him. "Why didn't you ever try to contact me?" "I wanted to," she admitted. "So many times. But you were in every headline, every article. I watched you fly around the world, close deals, win awards. I didn't want to be the person who dragged you into something you didn't choose." "But I would've," he said softly, not even sure if it was the truth or something he desperately wanted to believe. She looked at him now. "Would you? Back then? You didn't even stop me when I left." He had no defense. He had been selfish, so obsessed with control and achievement that he didn't even notice when someone like Olivia slipped out of his life. "I wasn't ready," he said. "But I am now." Her eyes didn't soften, but she nodded slightly. "They need stability. If you want to be here, be here. But don't make them fall in love with you only to walk away." "I won't," he said, meaning it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. There was another pause between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was thoughtful, even a little hopeful. They finished their tea in silence, and when he left that night, she walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, she said, "Same time tomorrow?" He turned, met her gaze, and replied, "Earlier, if you'll let me." That night, as he drove home, Evan didn't turn on the radio. He didn't check his phone. He didn't return the 3 emails his assistant had sent marked urgent. Instead, he rolled down the window and let the night air rush in, realizing for the first time that slowing down didn't mean losing control. Sometimes, it meant finally choosing the right things. Evan started arriving earlier each morning. At first, it was just to help Olivia with breakfast or the morning rush of getting the boys dressed and ready, but soon it became more than that. He began picking up little things on the way over: juice boxes they liked, band-aids with cartoon characters, socks that matched because Olivia always seemed to be looking for a missing pair. He noticed everything now, not just what was said but what was left unsaid, the tiredness in her eyes, the moments when the boys fought and she didn't have the energy to step in, the way she pressed a hand to her forehead when no one was looking. Evan started filling those spaces. Not all at once, and not perfectly, but with genuine effort. He would read to the boys while Olivia showered or cleaned the kitchen while they watched cartoons. Sometimes he didn't do anything at all except sit quietly and let the house breathe around him, no meetings, no calls, just presence. But everything started to shift when Olivia got sick. It was subtle at first. A headache she brushed off, a lingering cough, a few missed meals. Evan noticed, but she waved him off with a tired smile and told him she just needed sleep. A few days later, she collapsed in the hallway while putting away laundry. Evan caught her before she hit the floor, his heart racing as he laid her down and called her name. The boys ran in, confused and scared, and he told them everything was okay even though his hands were shaking. He called an ambulance. Olivia came to before they arrived, but she was pale and weak and too quiet. She tried to argue with the paramedics, tried to tell them she didn't need to go, but Evan stepped in and made the decision she couldn't. He held her hand the entire ride to the hospital, even when she squeezed it a little too tightly. The diagnosis wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious: an untreated infection, worsened by exhaustion, stress, and not enough self-care. The doctor looked at Evan as if he was the husband and explained everything in a tone reserved for family. Evan didn't correct him. He listened, asked questions, and signed papers when Olivia was too tired to hold a pen. She was admitted for a short stay. Rachel, the neighbor, agreed to watch the boys while Evan stayed at the hospital. He didn't leave her side. He pulled a chair next to her bed and sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the machines that beeped and the 4-bag that dripped slowly. Olivia slept, her face soft and vulnerable in a way he had never seen. He couldn't stop thinking about how close he had come to losing this, the life he had only just started to touch. When she woke up, her eyes found his instantly. "You stayed," she murmured, voice dry and raspy. He nodded. "Of course I did." "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." She closed her eyes again, and her fingers searched for his. He let her take his hand, and they stayed like that, silent but understood. That night, after she fell asleep again, Evan walked out into the hospital corridor. He leaned against the wall, pulled out his phone, and stared at it. Dozens of missed calls. Meetings rescheduled. A stockholder meeting he was supposed to lead. All of it had gone on without him, and for the first time, he didn't feel panic. He felt clarity. He typed a single message to his assistant: "Pause everything. Family comes first." Then he turned the phone off. Back at Olivia's bedside, he unfolded a blanket and sat back down, this time with a steadier heart. He realized he wasn't afraid of this life anymore. He was afraid of not choosing it. He was afraid of letting it slip away while he chased things that would never hold his hand at 3 a.m. Olivia stirred in her sleep and whispered something he couldn't quite make out. He leaned in, brushing her hair from her forehead, and whispered back, "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time, he meant it with every piece of who he was. Olivia stayed in the hospital for 4 days. During that time, Evan stepped into a version of himself he never knew existed. He woke the boys up each morning, made them cereal, tried and failed to comb their hair evenly, and let them wear mismatched socks when they insisted it was part of their style. He walked them to preschool, held their hands as they crossed the street, and tried to hide how nervous he was about doing it all wrong. But the boys didn't seem to notice. Lucas told him stories the entire way, about a magic lizard with flying powers, while Liam quietly picked flowers and handed them to Evan one by one. At the end of every day, Evan sat in the hospital next to Olivia's bed, updating her on everything, what the boys ate, what they argued about, the exact shape of the cloud Liam said looked like a dinosaur. She smiled, weak but warm, and listened like it was the most important briefing she'd ever received. The nurses began to talk. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, whispered to Evan one evening, "You're doing better than most dads who've been doing this for years." He didn't know how to respond to that, because he still felt like he was learning how to breathe in this new life. He hadn't signed a single contract, hadn't checked the market in days, and he didn't miss any of it. Instead, he found himself looking at the clock every few hours, counting down the minutes until he could be back at her side, or back with the boys building pillow forts and burning grilled cheese. On the last night before Olivia was discharged, she turned toward him in the dark room. Her voice was stronger now, but quiet. "You didn't have to step in like this." "I know," Evan said, shifting in the chair. "But I wanted to." "I kept them from you," she whispered, eyes on the ceiling. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe I wasn't." Evan leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "You were. Back then, I wasn't ready. I would have ruined everything. But now I'm here. And I want to be their dad. Not just the guy who shows up when it's convenient. I want to be in their lives. All the way." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw that mix of fear and hope in her eyes. "That means letting them love you. Letting them expect things from you. You know that, right?" "I do," he said. "And I want that more than I've ever wanted anything." She didn't say anything after that. She just reached for his hand again and held it, her grip stronger than the first time. When he left the room that night, he passed a small window at the end of the hallway. He stopped, stared out at the streetlights, and for a long time, he didn't think about work or power or success. He thought about how much he had missed, and how much more he was finally ready to fight for. The next morning, he brought her home. The boys had made a giant welcome sign that was half crayons, half glitter, and completely crooked. They threw their arms around her as if she'd been gone a year, not 4 days. Evan watched them, his heart full and aching at once. He helped her to the couch, fluffed the pillows, brought her tea. She didn't resist this time. She let him help. That afternoon, while the boys napped in a tangle of limbs and stuffed animals, Evan sat with Olivia in the kitchen. She looked tired but peaceful, the sunlight warming her face through the window. "They love you already," she said softly. "They're just too young to know how rare that is." "I don't take it for granted," he said. "I don't take any of this for granted." She smiled at him, and for the first time, it didn't feel guarded. "So what now?" He exhaled slowly. "Now I make sure I never give them a reason to question that I'm staying." And he meant it. Every word. Every breath. Because for once, Evan Harper wasn't chasing something more. He had already found it. He just needed to hold on. The following weeks moved in quiet, steady waves, no longer defined by chaos or crisis but by the kind of normalcy Evan had never experienced before. He started staying for dinner more often, sometimes helping Olivia cook, sometimes sitting with the boys while they waited for food, teaching them how to count using forks and napkins or helping Liam sound out new words. He wasn't perfect. He still burned toast, still occasionally said the wrong thing or forgot to pack snacks, but each day he stayed, each morning he showed up again, something inside the boys seemed to settle. They laughed louder, clung to his leg a little longer when he tried to leave, began to look for him first when something exciting or scary happened. The house started to absorb his presence as if it had always made space for him. One evening after dinner, while Lucas and Liam were building towers out of cereal boxes and giggling over whether Daddy Evan could build one taller, Olivia called him into the kitchen. She had her phone in her hand, her expression unreadable. She handed it to him without a word. On the screen was a headline, his name, his company, and a photograph of him holding Liam outside the preschool. The article speculated about his disappearance from the corporate spotlight, about the identity of the children, and whether the shift in his priorities meant instability within the Harper Group. He read the first few lines and stopped. His jaw tightened, but not in anger. He handed the phone back to her and leaned against the counter. "Are you going to lose everything because of this?" she asked, carefully, like she already knew the answer but needed him to say it out loud. "Maybe," he said. "Some of it, probably. The board's been circling. Investors don't like surprises. My absence isn't convenient for them. And you're okay with that?" "I didn't used to be. But now?" He looked through the doorway where the boys were laughing, climbing into a pillow fort that had half collapsed. "Now I think I finally understand what it means to be rich. It's not in numbers or control. It's in showing up, being needed, being loved without earning it. I never had that before. I don't care if they take my title. I've already traded it for something better." Olivia stared at him, the weight of his words resting between them. For so long, she had held the burden of raising their children, of keeping them safe and loved without help. Now, for the first time, she believed she might not have to do it alone anymore. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Olivia and Evan sat on the couch with a blanket over their legs and the sound of the city humming faintly outside the window. There was no need to fill the silence. But she broke it anyway. "I spent so long convincing myself I didn't need anyone. That letting someone back in would only cost me more than I had left to give." "I know," he said. "I did the same thing with my own life. Only my version was built out of contracts and corner offices." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "And now? Now I want the mess. The noise. The mornings with syrup on the floor and toy dinosaurs in the sink. I want all of it. I want them. And I want you, if you'll let me." Her expression didn't shift dramatically. There was no sudden tear, no cinematic gasp. Just a long breath. Then she leaned in, placed her hand over his, and rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm not promising easy," she said. "I'm not asking for easy," he replied. "I'm asking for real." And that night, with the streetlight casting soft shadows through the blinds and the weight of two small bodies asleep down the hall, something between them quietly changed. It wasn't a beginning. It wasn't a return. It was something new. Something stronger. Something earned. Fall settled in slowly, painting the trees in warm shades of amber and rust, and the world around them seemed to quiet just enough for Evan to realize how far he had come. The boys had begun kindergarten, their backpacks slightly too big for their shoulders, their laughter echoing down sidewalks as they raced to school every morning with Evan walking behind them, holding their lunchboxes and trying to keep up. Olivia returned to work part-time, taking on small design projects from home, her spark returning more and more each day. The chaos in their home never disappeared, it was loud and messy and alive, but for Evan, it had become the only kind of success that mattered. He didn't return to the Harper Group. When the board tried to lure him back with offers and restructured contracts, he declined. There was no bitterness in his refusal, only clarity. The company had been his identity for so long that walking away should have felt like failure. But it didn't. It felt like freedom. He redirected his energy into smaller projects, local startups, nonprofits, things that allowed him to stay close to home. It wasn't the empire he once chased, but it was something he built with purpose. Something he could leave behind with pride. One afternoon, he stood in the kitchen helping the boys decorate cookies shaped like pumpkins, their hands covered in frosting and sugar, their laughter loud and uninterrupted. Liam insisted that Bear needed a cookie too, placing a small one in front of the old plush toy, still patched but well loved. Lucas explained that the orange sprinkles were magic, and if Daddy ate them, he would never be tired again. Evan pretended to be amazed, exaggerating every bite until both boys collapsed into giggles. Olivia watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a smile tugging at her lips, and in her eyes was something unspoken, recognition, peace, maybe even love. That evening, after the boys had gone to bed and the kitchen was clean again, Evan handed Olivia a small box. She looked at him, eyebrows raised. "What's this?" she asked, but there was a softness in her voice. He shrugged, trying to keep it casual. "Something small." She opened it slowly, and inside was a key. Not shiny and new, but worn slightly at the edges. "It's to the house 2 blocks from here," he said. "I bought it last week. Not to take you away from this place, but to grow into something bigger. Something that's ours. If you want it." Olivia stared at the key for a long moment, then looked up at him. "You really aren't going anywhere, are you?" He stepped closer. "Not unless you kick me out." She smiled, the kind of smile that started in her eyes and settled into her chest. "Then I guess we better start packing." Months passed, then a year. The house became a home. The boys flourished, their rooms painted in their favorite colors, filled with books and stuffed animals and small, chaotic dreams. Evan found peace in the quiet mornings, the smell of pancakes, the way Olivia reached for his hand when no one else was looking. He wasn't the same man who once rushed through life, always chasing the next deal. He was slower now, more deliberate, and far more present. One night, as they sat in the backyard under a sky full of stars, the boys asleep upstairs and the world soft around them, Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. He looked at her, the woman who had once walked away to protect her children, and whispered, "You saved me, you know." She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered back, "No. You showed up. You saved yourself." He held her hand tighter and closed his eyes, the cool breeze brushing against his skin. He finally understood what it meant to be full, not of success or status, but of meaning, of family, of quiet moments that made a life. And in that stillness, Evan knew he had everything he'd ever been searching for. He just hadn't known it looked like this. He thought it was just a flat tire, until a quiet boy with his eyes and a familiar silver bracelet changed everything he believed about the past he left behind. Ryan Caldwell had never planned to stop that day. His schedule was tight, like always, calls, meetings, decisions that moved millions. He was driving back from a site inspection just outside the city, speeding down a quiet rural highway in his luxury black SUV, when the car began to pull unevenly. A moment later, the dashboard lit up. Flat tire. He muttered under his breath, pulled over, and stepped out of the vehicle with the frustrated detachment of a man who believed problems like this were beneath him. The sun beat down on his navy blue suit, and dust settled on his polished shoes as he popped the trunk and surveyed the tools. He hadn't changed a tire in over a decade. He was bending over when a voice came from behind him, small, clear, and unafraid. "Need help?" Ryan straightened and turned. Standing a few feet away was a boy no older than 7 or 8, with tousled dark hair and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He wore a slightly stained white t-shirt, faded jeans, and worn sneakers. His posture was confident, almost matter-of-fact, like helping a stranger fix a tire was just another part of his day. Ryan was about to dismiss him with a polite nod when his eyes landed on something unexpected. On the boy's wrist was a thin silver bracelet, dull with time but unmistakably familiar. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. He stepped closer, almost unconsciously, trying to get a better look. The bracelet looked exactly like the one he had given Haley 6 years ago. It had been custom-made, engraved with 2 words, "Stay brave." At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, just a gift before he left for the city to expand his business. She had cried when he gave it to her, and he had smiled, thinking they'd pick up where they left off when he came back. He never came back. The boy noticed Ryan staring. "My mom gave it to me," he said simply. "She said it was important to her." Ryan looked down at him again, really looked. The boy's hair was the same shade of deep brown as his own. His nose, his chin, even the way his eyes narrowed in curiosity, it was all familiar. And then there were the eyes. Bright blue. Not sky blue. Not gray. The exact piercing blue that stared back at Ryan in the mirror every morning. His stomach twisted. The boy wasn't just some kid offering help. Something about him felt too connected, too close, like looking into a past that had circled back and punched a hole through his present. He suddenly forgot about the flat tire, about the calls he was missing, about the meeting that would now be rescheduled. "What's your name?" Ryan asked, his voice lower, slower. "Evan," the boy replied, brushing his hands against his jeans. "What's yours?" Ryan stared at him for another long moment. Then, with a strange edge of something like awe or disbelief, he said, "Ryan." Evan didn't react. He just nodded. "Okay. Can I help with the tire now?" Ryan could only nod. And as Evan knelt down next to the wheel, Ryan stood above him in a daze, heart pounding, trying to understand what kind of moment he had just stepped into. All he knew was that nothing in his carefully controlled life would ever be the same again. Ryan stood beside the SUV, watching as the boy knelt confidently by the tire and began inspecting the lug nuts with a seriousness that didn't match his age. Evan's hands were small but steady, and his focus was complete, as if this wasn't the first time he'd helped someone stranded on the side of the road. Ryan didn't know whether to speak, to kneel beside him, or to walk away and gather his thoughts. His instincts were all off. In business, he was decisive, sharp, always 5 moves ahead. But right now, every plan he'd ever known was crumbling under the weight of a bracelet and a child's familiar face. He crouched slowly, trying to keep his voice level. "You've done this before?" Evan nodded without looking up. "Yeah. My mom's car gets old sometimes. We don't always have money for help, so she showed me how." There was no trace of embarrassment in his voice, no hesitation, just the simple reality of a life Ryan had never imagined for Haley. He had left her with promises and ambition, telling himself he'd come back once everything was stable, once the company was launched, once his success had a name. But then came the delays, the pressure, and the silent choice to not look back. Now, looking at Evan, he realized how much had happened while he was building his empire. He hesitated before asking the next question. "What's your mom's name?" Evan looked up briefly, his blue eyes catching the light in a way that made Ryan's chest tighten. "Haley. Haley Rivers." The name hit him like a punch. She hadn't changed her name. She hadn't married. Something about that made it worse. It meant she had stayed still while he kept moving forward, without ever turning around. Ryan stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away, suddenly needing air even though they were outside. He turned back after a moment. "How old are you, Evan?" "7, the boy replied, tightening a bolt with a grunt. "Almost 8. 7. Ryan did the math. It lined up. The year he left, the silence, the distance, he had thought she was angry. That maybe she was better off without him. But she had been pregnant. She had been carrying his child, and he had never known. Or worse, never made himself available to know. He looked down at the small, determined boy crouched beside his car, and a swell of regret unlike anything he had ever felt rose in his throat. Evan finished and stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans again. "It's done. You're good to go." Ryan couldn't speak. He reached into his wallet automatically, pulling out a bill without thinking, but the boy shook his head. "I don't want money. I was just helping." That answer, so clear and humble, only twisted the knife deeper. He shoved the bill back into his pocket. "Do you and your mom live around here?" Evan nodded and pointed up the road. That yellow house with the red porch. We just got it fixed last year. Ryan followed the direction with his eyes. It wasn't far. He could walk there in less than 5 minutes. He imagined Haley inside, maybe cleaning, maybe cooking dinner, completely unaware of the storm that was about to walk back into her life. Would it be okay if I came by to say thank you? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Evan tilted his head, clearly thinking it over like a miniature adult. I think she'd want that. She talks about you sometimes. That stopped Ryan cold. She does? Evan nodded. Only a little. She said you were smart. And busy. And not very good at calling people back. Ryan laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Only shame. That sounds about right. Evan shrugged. She says we don't need a lot. Just enough. But I think she misses someone. Maybe you. Ryan looked at him again, really looked, and realized that the boy hadn't just changed a tire. He had cracked something open inside him that Ryan didn't know he still had. The cold layers of years gone by, of choices made too easily, of love abandoned for ambition, were starting to peel back. And as Evan ran up the road, disappearing toward the yellow house, Ryan stayed where he was, surrounded by silence, heart pounding, unable to ignore the truth anymore. He had a son. And a second chance. And he wasn't sure he deserved either. But he was going to find out. Ryan didn't drive away. For several minutes after Evan had jogged off toward the house with the red porch, he stood beside his SUV with the repaired tire, hands resting on his hips, heart pounding beneath his crisp shirt. The wind carried the scent of distant pine trees and sun-warmed pavement, but he barely noticed it. All he could see in his mind was that silver bracelet and the child's eyes that mirrored his own. It had taken less than 30 minutes for his entire past to rise from where he'd buried it and plant itself firmly in front of him, alive, talking, helping him with a tire like it was the most natural thing in the world. He got in the car not to leave, but to collect himself. He didn't start the engine. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, emails, missed calls, his assistant's concerned messages about the delay, but none of it mattered. For the first time in years, Ryan didn't feel the pull of the office, the pressure of the market, or the need to be anywhere but exactly where he was. Still, he hesitated. What was he going to say to her? How do you knock on the door of a woman you abandoned and tell her you just met your son on the side of the road? After 15 more minutes of indecision, he finally stepped out, locked the car, and walked slowly toward the house. With each step, memories returned, softer ones, things he hadn't allowed himself to revisit. The first time Haley made him laugh until he cried. The way she used to sit cross-legged on her couch in oversized sweatpants, humming to herself while doing a crossword. The night he gave her the bracelet, telling her it was a reminder to stay strong while he was gone. He hadn't known he would stay gone for good. The house looked worn but cared for. The paint on the porch was chipped in places, but the flowers along the fence were in full bloom. A wind chime tinkled gently above the doorway. He hesitated at the steps. Inside that house was the woman who had once trusted him completely, and the child he had never known he had. His hand hovered near the doorbell, and then finally, he pressed it. The sound echoed inside. A moment passed. Then another. He heard footsteps, light and steady. When the door opened, Haley stood there. For a second, neither of them spoke. She looked different, but not in the way time wears a person down. Her features were the same, delicate but strong, and her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. Her eyes, though, had changed. They were still the warm hazel he remembered, but now guarded, sharpened with experience and a tired kind of wisdom. She wore a faded t-shirt, jeans, and no makeup. She looked beautiful. "Ryan," she said, voice neutral. He opened his mouth but nothing came out. He had imagined this moment in so many ways on the walk over, and yet now that it was real, he found himself unprepared. I didn't know, he said finally. I swear I didn't know. She folded her arms. Didn't know what? That I was raising your son alone? That I wore that bracelet for a year after you left, waiting for a call? Her words weren't angry, but they carried the weight of disappointment layered over pain. Ryan stepped forward slightly. Haley, I thought you were done with me. I figured I had missed my chance. You didn't just miss it, she said, her tone quiet. You erased it. I thought if I left, it would be easier for both of us. That you'd move on. That I wasn't good for you, he said, realizing how hollow it sounded even as he said it. She looked at him, really looked, as if trying to find the truth behind the voice she used to love. And did you move on, Ryan? He couldn't lie. No. Not really. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of distant birds and the creak of the porch railing in the breeze. Finally, she stepped aside and opened the door wider. Come in, she said. But only because Evan will want to know if you really showed up. He nodded and stepped inside, not knowing if this was the start of redemption or something even more complicated. But he knew one thing with complete certainty. He wasn't walking away again. The moment Ryan stepped into the house, he was hit by an overwhelming wave of familiarity and strangeness all at once. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, like cinnamon or warm oatmeal. The walls were lined with modest framed photos, drawings in bright crayon colors, and handmade crafts that could only have come from a child's imagination. There was a warmth here that no penthouse apartment or luxury suite he had ever lived in could replicate. It was a home, not polished, not perfect, but alive. He took a slow breath, letting it settle into his chest, and followed Haley into the small living room. She didn't offer coffee or tea, didn't try to make conversation. She simply sat on the arm of the couch, watching him, waiting. Ryan stood in the center of the room, taking in everything. His eyes landed on a photo perched above the fireplace, a snapshot of Evan grinning with a missing tooth, holding what looked like a hand-painted birdhouse. Next to him in the photo was Haley, smiling without makeup, her hair in a messy bun, her eyes tired but happy. There was no man in the picture. No father figure. Just the two of them, a team. I can't believe how much he looks like me, Ryan said softly, still staring at the photo. But he's got your heart. He didn't hesitate to help a stranger. Haley gave a short breath of laughter that didn't quite reach her eyes. He's a good kid. He had to be. He turned to face her. You should have told me. I did try, she replied, her voice even. Once. I called your office when I found out. I left messages. I sent one letter. I never heard back. After that, I stopped trying to make excuses for you. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, guilt tightening around his ribs. He remembered that time. It had been chaos, new investors, long hours, a constant fear that everything he was building would collapse. But what haunted him now wasn't just that he'd missed her calls. It was that he hadn't made himself available to receive them at all. He had left without looking back, without leaving a door open. I didn't know, he said again, not as an excuse this time, but as a confession. Haley leaned back, arms still crossed. You didn't want to know. The words were sharp but not unfair. And they cut deep. At that moment, Evan came running into the room, his face lighting up when he saw Ryan. He held a small action figure in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. You stayed, Evan said with a grin, as if surprised by his own happiness. I told you I would, Ryan replied, kneeling down to meet him at eye level. Wanna see my room? Evan asked eagerly. I've got space stuff and a rocket lamp. Ryan glanced up at Haley, unsure if she would allow it. She gave a quiet nod. Evan led him down the hall into a room that was small but full of energy, walls painted with stars, model rockets hanging from the ceiling, books stacked beside the bed. Ryan looked around, his chest tight with a blend of awe and heartbreak. He had missed all of this: the first steps, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the quiet triumphs of a little boy discovering the world. "This one's my favorite," Evan said, holding up a drawing of a space shuttle with the word "Explorer" scrawled underneath in shaky handwriting. "Because it's brave." Ryan stared at the picture, barely able to respond. "You are brave, Evan." The boy looked at him curiously. "My mom says that too. She says being brave means doing what's right, even when it's scary." Ryan nodded, unable to speak for a second. "She's right." They spent a few more minutes in the room, and when Evan finally returned to his coloring book, Ryan stepped out quietly, meeting Haley again in the hallway. Her arms were no longer crossed, but her posture was still cautious. "I know I can't undo anything," he said quietly. "But I want to be part of his life. I want to be there now, however you'll let me." Haley studied him for a long moment. "It's not just about showing up once, Ryan. He's not a meeting you attend and check off your list. He's a person. He'll get attached. He'll believe in you. If you disappear again—" "I won't," he said before she could finish. "I swear." She sighed and finally nodded. "Okay. You can start by picking him up from school tomorrow." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. A door cracked open. A second chance in motion. And this time, he was ready to walk through it. The next morning, Ryan stood outside the school 20 minutes earlier than necessary, leaning against his car and watching children stream in and out of the gates. It was a modest public school, surrounded by trimmed hedges and a faded mural on the brick wall that read, "Dream Big." He had never in his life picked up a child from school, let alone waited with anticipation and nerves twisting in his stomach. Business meetings had never made him this uneasy. But this was different. This wasn't about closing a deal or being impressive. This was about showing up, something he had never done when it mattered most. Now, he was determined to start changing that. He had barely slept the night before. He kept replaying every word from Haley, every look, every moment in Evan's room. He thought about the handmade space drawings and the rocket lamp and the way Evan said the word brave like it carried weight. And more than anything, he thought about the moment Haley had said, "Start by picking him up." It wasn't a grand gesture, but to him, it was a bridge. A fragile one. One he didn't dare take for granted. When the bell rang, a flood of students poured out of the building, chattering and running toward parents, older siblings, and school buses. Ryan stood straighter, eyes scanning the crowd until he spotted Evan in the middle of the chaos. The boy's backpack was slightly crooked, and his shoelaces were untied. He looked around, searching, until his gaze landed on Ryan. His face lit up, not in shock, but in confirmation. As if he had expected him to be there all along. "You came," Evan said, walking up quickly, his voice casual but his smile wide. "I told you I would," Ryan said, opening the passenger door for him. "I thought maybe you'd forget," Evan added, climbing in and buckling his seatbelt with exaggerated effort. Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he got in the driver's seat, started the engine, and glanced over. "I used to forget things," he said carefully. "Important things. But not anymore. Not you." They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Evan munching on crackers Ryan had thought to bring, the radio playing softly in the background. Eventually, Evan started talking, about school, about how they were learning to add numbers with pictures of apples, about a kid named Drew who got in trouble for hiding glue sticks in his desk. Ryan listened closely, nodding, reacting, asking questions. Every word felt like a gift, a door opening a little more. When they got back to the house, Haley was on the porch watering a few potted plants. She looked up when the car pulled in and watched them for a second before walking down the steps. Evan jumped out and ran to her, lifting his backpack like it held treasure. "Mom, look! He really came. And he brought snacks. Not the healthy kind either." Ryan stepped out more slowly, unsure of how welcome he was in this moment. But Haley gave him a nod, quiet, cautious approval, and that was enough. Later that afternoon, while Evan played with building blocks in the living room, Ryan found himself in the kitchen helping Haley with dinner. She handed him vegetables to chop and didn't correct his technique even when it was clear he didn't know what he was doing. The silence between them was lighter than before, almost companionable. "You're good with him," she said without looking up. "I don't know what I'm doing," Ryan admitted. "I'm just trying not to mess it up." She wiped her hands on a towel and leaned back against the counter. "Kids don't need perfect. They need present. You showed up today. That matters." He looked at her, eyes steady. "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't respond with words, but he saw the faintest shift in her expression, less guarded, a little more open. It wasn't forgiveness yet. But it was trust, beginning to grow like something planted long ago that had finally started pushing through the surface. That night, after dinner and after Evan had fallen asleep on the couch with a toy spaceship clutched in one hand, Ryan stood by the doorway, preparing to leave. Haley walked him out, arms crossed loosely, sweater pulled tight against the cool air. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded. "Same time." And just before he turned away, she added softly, "Thank you." Ryan walked to his car feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Not victory. But connection. Real, messy, unfinished, but real. And he knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was the most important thing he had ever tried to build. Over the next few weeks, Ryan settled into a rhythm that was completely foreign to the life he used to live. He started waking up early not to check the stock market or review investor reports but to pack snacks for Evan and rehearse bedtime stories in his head. He began organizing his business calls around school pickups and learned the exact temperature Evan liked his hot chocolate. It was awkward at first. He didn't know which games Evan liked most, or how to comfort him when he scraped his knee on the sidewalk, but he was learning, slowly, quietly, with a kind of determination he'd never felt for anything else. The walls in Haley's home began to shift. At first, Ryan was a guest, someone who stood just inside the door, unsure of how far he was allowed to step. But as the days passed, he found himself helping Evan with homework at the kitchen table, listening to the same math songs over and over, and folding laundry on the couch while Haley washed dishes. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but there was an ease building between them, unspoken but undeniable. One Thursday evening, after Evan had fallen asleep early with a crayon still in his hand, Haley and Ryan sat on the front steps with mugs of tea, watching the wind stir the leaves in the yard. The street was quiet, the porch light casting a soft glow over their shoulders. Ryan hadn't planned on staying that long, but every time he thought of leaving, Evan had begged him to stay just a little bit longer, and Haley hadn't said no. Haley sipped her tea and spoke without turning to him. "He asks questions at night when you leave. Like where you go. If you're still going to be here tomorrow." Ryan looked at the stars above, the sharp ache of guilt resting in his chest. "I don't blame him. He doesn't have any reason to believe I'll keep showing up." "He wants to," she said. "He wants to believe in you. And he wants me to believe in you too." Ryan turned to look at her, studying the calm strength in her expression. "Do you?" he asked, not pressing, just asking. Haley took a long breath. "I want to. And that's not something I thought I'd say when I saw you on my doorstep." He gave a quiet laugh, more out of surprise than amusement. "You had every right to slam the door." She finally looked at him. "But I didn't." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, and then she added, almost as an afterthought, "You've changed. You're not the same man who left." Ryan nodded slowly. That man didn't understand what he had. He thought ambition meant cutting everything else out. I've spent years being successful and alone. I didn't know what I was missing until Evan stood on the side of the road with a wrench in his hand. Haley smiled faintly. That sounds like him. Ryan set down his mug and leaned forward slightly. I don't want to just visit his life, Haley. I want to be in it. And not just for Evan. I want to rebuild what I destroyed. If it's too late, I understand. But I'm here because I mean it. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what this is yet. But I know what it's not. It's not temporary anymore. I've seen you stay. So has he. A breeze rustled through the trees, and for the first time in years, Ryan felt something inside him settle. Not with finality, not with full resolution, but with the quiet hope that he had found his way back to something that had once been real. And now, slowly, it could be real again. Saturday mornings had always been background noise in Ryan's old life, just another day to catch up on reports, respond to international emails, and prepare for Monday. But this Saturday was different. He found himself sitting cross-legged on the carpet of Haley's living room, surrounded by Lego bricks, coloring pages, and the happy hum of Evan narrating a made-up adventure involving a spaceship, a flying sandwich, and a villain named Mr. Socks. Ryan had never built a Lego rocket before. He had never sat on a living room floor for more than 10 minutes without checking his phone. But now he was here, fully present, watching his son light up over every imaginary turn of the story. Evan handed him a bright blue block and said, very seriously, you have to put this on top, or the whole thing will explode. Trust me, I tested it. Ryan followed his instructions without question, his smile easy and unguarded. He didn't even realize how natural it had become to follow his son's lead, to let go of control, and to simply be someone Evan could count on. Haley watched them from the kitchen, one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee, the other tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She had seen pieces of this new Ryan over the last few weeks, in the way he remembered Evan's favorite snacks, in how he tied his shoes the exact way Evan liked, double-looped and a little loose. But today, watching them laugh on the floor, something inside her softened. She wasn't waiting for him to mess up anymore. She was watching to see if he would stay steady, and he had. Later that day, Evan invited Ryan to see the old oak tree behind the house, the one where he'd built a secret spy base, using branches and rope. Ryan followed him across the backyard, stepping over fallen leaves and the remnants of summer chalk drawings faded on the pavement. When they reached the tree, Evan turned to him, serious again in that way only children could be. Do you think you're gonna stay forever? Evan asked. Ryan knelt down to meet him eye to eye. I want to, he said. If you and your mom want me to. Evan looked thoughtful, then nodded slowly. Mom says people leave sometimes. But I think you're trying not to. I am, Ryan said. More than anything. Evan reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of string with 3 plastic beads tied in the middle, blue, green, and gold. It's a lucky charm, he explained. I made it at school. I was gonna give it to Mom, but maybe you should have it. You need the luck. Ryan accepted it like it was made of gold. I think this might be the most important thing anyone's ever given me. When they returned to the house, Haley was in the doorway, arms crossed lightly, watching them. She noticed the string in Ryan's hand, the way Evan reached for his fingers without thinking. There was something so normal in it, something so right, that she couldn't push it away. That evening, after Evan fell asleep halfway through a bedtime story Ryan had been reading, Haley walked into the living room while Ryan quietly pulled the blanket over his son. She waited until he stood up and followed her to the kitchen, where she opened a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. I was going to mail this to you once, she said, handing it to him. But I didn't. Inside was a photo of Evan as a baby, barely a few months old, wrapped in a soft blanket with his blue eyes wide open. Ryan's breath caught. He ran his fingers gently over the edges of the photo, as if afraid it might disappear. "Why are you giving me this now?" he asked. "Because I think you're ready to understand what you missed," Haley said. "And because I don't want you to miss what's still ahead." There were no speeches, no declarations of forgiveness. But in that moment, a door opened wider than ever before, not just to Evan, but to the pieces of a life Ryan never thought he'd be allowed to reclaim. And this time, he didn't need to be asked to stay. He already knew he would. Sunday came with golden light filtering through the curtains and the smell of pancakes drifting through the house. Ryan stood at the stove, wearing an apron that said, "Chef in Training," in bold lettering, a gift Evan had insisted on giving him just a few days earlier. The batter was a little too thick, and the first few pancakes came out lopsided, but Evan declared them the best ever, with syrup dripping off his chin and a thumbs up that made Ryan feel like he had just won a prize more valuable than any contract he'd ever signed. Haley was sipping her coffee at the table, barefoot, hair still slightly messy from sleep, watching them with a softness that hadn't been there weeks ago. She didn't try to take over the cooking or correct him. She simply let the moment unfold, and that, more than anything, told Ryan they had turned a corner. After breakfast, they all walked to the park. Evan rode his small bike ahead of them, shouting occasional updates about imaginary obstacles on the sidewalk and pretending he was a space explorer on a secret mission. Haley and Ryan followed behind at a slower pace, walking side by side in a silence that didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Comfortable. Ryan had never walked like this before, with no agenda, no need to impress or prove anything. Just the steady rhythm of one step after another, the sound of laughter in the air, and Haley's shoulder occasionally brushing his when their arms swayed too close. At the park, Evan ran to the swings, his energy endless, and Ryan pushed him higher and higher while Haley sat on a nearby bench, smiling to herself as she watched them. After a while, Evan jumped off the swing mid-air and landed with a dramatic superhero pose, brushing imaginary dirt off his knees. "Did I fly?" he asked, breathless. "You flew," Ryan said. "Higher than I ever did." When they got home that afternoon, Ryan helped Evan with a craft project for school, a poster about families. Evan insisted on including photos, so they printed a few using Haley's old printer. One was of the three of them at the park, another of Evan in his space-themed pajamas with Ryan beside him reading a bedtime story. The last one was the baby photo Haley had given Ryan the night before. Evan looked at it, eyes wide with recognition and curiosity. "Was that me?" he asked. Haley nodded. "That was you, not long after you were born." "Was Dad there?" Evan looked between them. Ryan's heart squeezed, but he met his son's eyes. "I wasn't, buddy. But I should have been. I didn't know then. But now I do. And I'm here now. Every day." Evan nodded slowly and added a heart sticker next to the baby photo. "Then it's okay." That evening, while Evan slept with his arms around his stuffed rocket and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floor, Haley walked Ryan to the door. But this time, she didn't just stand at the threshold. She leaned against the frame, watching him with something different in her expression, something settled, something real. "You've kept your word," she said. "You didn't disappear." "I won't," he said. "Not ever again." Haley stepped forward, closed the small distance between them, and for the first time in years, reached for his hand. She didn't say anything else, and she didn't have to. The gesture said everything. Ryan squeezed her hand gently, and they stood there, not as broken people trying to rewrite the past, but as two people willing to write the future together. Not perfect. Not rushed. Just honest. In that moment, under the quiet porch light with the scent of spring in the air and the echo of Evan's laughter still in their minds, Ryan knew he had finally built something that mattered. Something real. Something worth everything he had once thought he needed to chase. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. From an author's perspective, the ending of this story isn't just happy, it's deeply earned. It doesn't offer a fairy tale resolution or instant harmony, as fictional narratives often do. Instead, it shows a journey, a slow, awkward, but sincere process of returning. Ryan isn't a hero by nature, he's a man who made mistakes, and that's exactly what makes his path meaningful. He didn't get a second chance, he earned it through presence, patience, and honesty. What stands out most is that the ending leaves space to breathe. There are no dramatic declarations, no idealized moments. There's a quiet touch, a simple, "you stayed," and that's enough. Because real love isn't found in words, it's proven through action. And the story's final note reflects that, it's not about reclaiming the past, but about becoming worthy of the present.